Have you ever woken up one morning, rolled over, looked at your spouse, and felt like you were lying next to a stranger? Not because anything dramatic happened overnight, but because something in your heart has slowly, quietly changed over time. It's a strange feeling. You're not angry exactly. You're not heartbroken. But there's a heaviness, a sense of distance. Like the warmth you once had between you has been replaced by silence, routine, and maybe even a bit of regret. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. So many people, especially those of us in our 60s and beyond, find ourselves sitting across the table from someone we used to laugh with, dream with, and feel connected to. And now, we barely speak unless it's about groceries, the grandkids, or who forgot to take the trash out. The truth is, no one tells you that even the most loving marriages can slowly grow cold, not because of one big blow-up, but because of small, unnoticed shifts that add up over time. Today, I want to talk to you about those shifts. We're going to gently unpack the real reasons why some marriages lose their spark after decades together. Not to place blame, but to better understand what's happening. Because when we understand it, we can do something about it. We can choose not to let the silence win. We can choose connection, even in the later chapters of life. Let's start with something that's so common. It often gets brushed off. The quiet changes in our partner's behavior and habits. In the early years, we tend to overlook little things. Maybe he smoked a bit, or left his socks on the floor. Maybe she had a sharp tongue now and then. We'd chalk it up to quirks. That's just how he is, we'd say, usually with a smile. But over time, those quirks can become irritants, especially if they grow worse and our tolerance grows thinner. Imagine this. Your husband used to smoke a bit in the garage, but now it's constant. The smell clings to the curtains, your clothes, even your pillow. You've asked him to quit, not just for you, but for his health, and yet nothing changes. Or maybe it's not smoking. Maybe it's the way he stopped caring about keeping his space clean, or how he hasn't been to a doctor in years, even though his cough sounds worse each month. You're not trying to nag. You're worried. You're tired. You're the one washing the sheets, scrubbing the ashtray, reminding him to eat something healthy, and still, it feels like he doesn't notice how hard you're trying. That's the thing. It's not just about the habits themselves. It's about what they represent. They begin to feel like a symbol of disregard, like you don't matter enough for him to make the effort. And that hurts. That's where the resentment begins. Not with yelling, but with silence. A quiet kind of sadness that settles in your chest and never fully leaves. And then there's the other side of that coin, when you realize that responsibilities in your home have somehow fallen mostly on your shoulders. Maybe it started when you had kids. Maybe you just took care of things because it felt natural. But now the kids are grown, and yet nothing has changed. You're still the one cooking dinner every night, managing the bills, scheduling appointments, making sure the house doesn't fall apart. And what's he doing? Watching TV? Scrolling on his phone? Heading out to play golf without a second thought? At first, you tell yourself it's okay. He worked hard all those years. He deserves to relax. But deep down, a little voice whispers, "What about me?" You deserve rest too. You deserve to be seen, to be appreciated, not taken for granted. And yet so often that's what ends up happening. You find yourself growing weary, not just physically, but emotionally. Tired of feeling like you're holding the entire household together while he floats through the days, unaware of the weight you're carrying. I want to tell you something important here. That feeling of being unappreciated is not petty. It's not dramatic. It's valid. And it's often a warning sign. A sign that the emotional partnership in your marriage needs attention. Because marriage isn't just about staying together under one roof. It's about sharing the load, both the joys and the burdens. When that balance shifts too far for too long, the cracks begin to show. You might find yourself doing the mental math in your head. How many years you've cooked alone? How many holidays you planned while he relaxed? How many times you bit your tongue instead of saying, "I need help"? That math doesn't lie. And when the numbers stack up, it's no wonder so many women begin to feel invisible in their own homes. And yet, it's not just the housework or the habits. There's something else, something deeper that often creeps in with time. The slow decline in health and vitality, and the way it changes the dynamic between two people. When we first fell in love, many of us were active, full of energy, chasing dreams and dancing at weddings. But now, bodies ache, energy dips, sleep becomes elusive, and for some, health issues, often brought on by years of poor habits, start to dominate daily life. I've heard from so many women who say things like, "I feel more like a nurse than a wife." That's not an exaggeration. When your partner refuses to take care of himself, whether it's ignoring doctor's advice, eating terribly, or refusing to quit smoking, it's not just his burden. It becomes yours too. Suddenly, you're the one picking up his prescriptions, staying awake to listen to his snoring, worrying about every cough or skipped appointment. And it's not just exhausting, it's heartbreaking. Because the man you once shared walks and laughter with is now stuck in front of the television, unable or unwilling to change. You miss him. You miss the man he used to be. But every conversation about getting help turns into an argument, or worse, is ignored altogether. And that leaves you feeling helpless, angry, and alone. If any of this resonates with you, please know you're not being selfish. Wanting a partner who cares about his health, about your needs, about your well-being, isn't asking for too much. It's asking for the bare minimum. You deserve that. You deserve to feel like you're not in this alone, that you're not slowly disappearing while holding everyone else up. Let's take a deep breath here, together. Because this is a heavy conversation, I know. But it's one that needs to be had. Because silence is what feeds resentment. And unspoken pain doesn't go away, it just buries itself deeper. Now, if you're still with me, I want to thank you. Truly. It takes courage to look at something as personal and complex as a long-term marriage and ask the hard questions. But it's in those questions that healing begins. Let's keep walking through this together. There's something deeply unsettling about feeling alone while lying next to the person you promised to share your life with. You can be in the same room, sharing the same space, even the same bed, and yet it feels like a world of silence exists between you. If you've ever found yourself reaching out with your words, your gestures, your time, only to be met with indifference or distraction, you know exactly what I mean. Feeling ignored in a marriage doesn't always come with shouting matches or obvious signs. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, the lack of a simple, "How was your day?" or the way your thoughts seem to bounce off the walls instead of landing in his heart. You might notice that your conversations have become mechanical, like you're reporting household updates instead of sharing your inner world. You used to laugh together. Now you mostly plan meals and manage logistics. It's not that there's open hostility. It's more like a slow fading of emotional color until everything feels gray. Emily, a woman I once spoke to at a community meeting, told me that she started to feel invisible after her husband retired. At first, she thought they'd finally have more time together, to reconnect, to travel, to enjoy simple joys like gardening or watching their grandkids grow. But instead, he withdrew into his own world. His hobbies, his television shows, his news programs. He became a background presence, more interested in headlines than in her thoughts. And it wasn't that he was cruel. He just stopped engaging. What she said next stayed with me. I felt lonelier sitting next to him than I ever did living alone in my 20s. Loneliness in marriage is its own kind of ache. It's different from being physically alone. In fact, Being surrounded by family, yet feeling emotionally abandoned by your spouse is one of the most confusing kinds of sadness. You wonder if it's you, if maybe you've become less interesting, less exciting, less lovable. But the truth is, it's not about your worth. It's about disconnection. And it often begins when one partner stops noticing. When someone no longer sees your efforts, your fatigue, or your quiet hope for connection, it's like a light inside you begins to dim. You still show up. You still cook dinner, do the laundry, tidy the living room, even ask how his back is doing. But deep down, you're starving for emotional nourishment. Not grand gestures, just a little eye contact. A little, I see you. A little, I appreciate you. Over time, this lack of recognition builds up. It turns into doubt, into a persistent wondering, do I matter to him anymore? And when those thoughts repeat enough times without an answer, they turn into resentment. Not the kind that yells, but the kind that withdraws. You stop sharing your feelings. You stop expecting his attention. And that silence, that's where marriages slowly begin to break apart. Not from hatred, but from emptiness. Now let's talk about another reason so many marriages begin to drift, a change in how we view life and marriage itself. Because here's the truth, how we see love at 25 is not how we see love at 65. And that shift can shake the foundation if we're not ready for it. When we're young, love is about dreams. We marry with visions of a future filled with shared adventures, vacations, holding hands during walks, building a cozy home, maybe even retiring and spending lazy mornings in the garden together. There's so much hope in the beginning. And often, in those early years, the challenges are external: money, kids, careers. So we power through them, holding on to the idea that someday, once life settles down, we'll finally get back to each other. But then someday comes, the kids move out, the house becomes quieter, retirement arrives, and suddenly there's space. Space to reflect, space to feel, space to ask, is this what I wanted? Is this the person I feel safe and fulfilled beside? For Carol, a retired teacher, that moment of realization came one afternoon while folding laundry. She and her husband had just celebrated their 40th anniversary. But instead of feeling proud and joyful, she felt empty. They had everything they'd once hoped for: a modest home, enough money to live comfortably, grown children with good jobs. But her husband, once so curious and full of ideas, now spent most of his days sitting silently in front of the TV, uninterested in travel, books, even conversation. And when she tried to talk to him about how she felt, he dismissed it with a shrug. We're fine. What more do you want? That question stuck with her. What more did she want? She wanted partnership, presence, a shared sense of purpose. Not fireworks or romance from a movie, but warmth, connection, a reason to keep growing together. This is something many women grapple with later in life. The version of marriage they dreamed of in their 20s no longer aligns with the reality they're living in their 60s. And they begin to mourn, not just the loss of connection, but the loss of the vision they once cherished. It's like grieving a future that never arrived. But here's the thing, that grief is not the end of the story. It's also the beginning of clarity. It's a moment when you realize you have a right to reimagine your life, to ask for more. Not in a selfish way, but in an honest one. Because while some things about aging are out of our control, our emotional lives are still very much ours to shape. Maybe your partner isn't the same as he used to be. Maybe you're not either. But that doesn't mean the story is over. It means the story is evolving. And with awareness, with conversation, with effort, there's always the possibility of writing a new chapter. A gentler, more connected one. Let's sit with that thought for a moment. Maybe even breathe it in. Just because you've been with someone for decades doesn't mean you're not allowed to want more, to want better, Not extravagance, not perfection, just respect. Shared joy. A hand that reaches for yours without needing to be asked. We all deserve that. There's a quiet kind of heartbreak that happens when you realize the physical closeness you once shared with your partner has faded, not just the hugs or kisses, but the deeper connection that comes with intimacy. For many couples, especially as they grow older, changes in physical health can bring unspoken tension into the bedroom. You may not talk about it, but you feel it. That space between you at night that used to be filled with warmth now feels like a wall. Sometimes it begins with age. Our bodies change, hormones shift, energy levels fluctuate. But often it's more than biology. It's emotional. When one partner stops trying, or avoids the topic altogether, the other is left feeling unwanted, rejected, and confused. For women especially, who may still feel vibrant and emotionally open in their 50s, 60s, or even 70s, the loss of physical intimacy can feel like being slowly erased. I remember talking to Michelle, a soft-spoken woman in her mid-40s. She told me how, for years, she had tried to reconnect with her husband, Greg, to reignite the passion they once shared. It wasn't just about sex, she said. It was about closeness, about feeling seen, desired, appreciated as a woman. But Greg, worn down by stress, poor health, and what he called just getting older, had withdrawn. And when Michelle brought up her needs, he would either laugh it off or change the subject. Over time, she stopped trying, but the sadness lingered. She said, "I feel like I'm sleeping beside a roommate, or worse, someone who's forgotten I exist." This is not a selfish feeling. Wanting to feel close to your partner, physically, emotionally, spiritually, is not a sign of weakness. It's human. And when that connection disappears, it often leaves a wound no one else can see. A wound that, if left unspoken, turns into distance and then into resentment. And that resentment? It doesn't just stay in the bedroom. It seeps into every part of life. Sometimes that pain grows into something even harder to admit. Comparison. You may not mean to do it, but you start noticing how other husbands behave. At a family gathering, you see your friend's husband bring her a plate of food without being asked. Or how another man holds his wife's hand as they walk down the street. It's not jealousy in the dramatic sense. It's more like a quiet ache, an internal whisper that says, "Why don't I have that?" Jennifer, who has been married for over 15 years, told me she used to brush off those feelings. But then slowly, the comparisons became more frequent. When other husbands showed small acts of love, calling their wives sweetheart, sending flowers for no reason, helping with chores, Jennifer couldn't help but notice how different her own experience was. Her husband Mike used to be affectionate, used to compliment her, surprise her, listen to her, but now he seemed disconnected, like his attention had drifted somewhere else. She didn't want to be critical. She didn't want to complain. But as the comparisons added up, so did her sadness. Not because she wanted someone else's husband, but because she missed the man she thought she still had. This kind of thinking isn't about being ungrateful. It's about unmet needs. It's about realizing that you still want to feel loved, seen, cherished, even after decades together. And when those needs are no longer met, you naturally begin to wonder why. Why did things change? Was it time? Stress? Laziness? Or is this simply what marriage turns into? But that line of thought can be dangerous. Because the more we compare, the more we drift from our own truth. The more we focus on what others have, the harder it becomes to reconnect with what we might still be able to repair, if there's still a desire to try. And then, perhaps the hardest truth of all, the way physical neglect, simple things like grooming, hygiene, or basic effort can begin to destroy attraction altogether. This isn't about being shallow. It's about respect. about effort, about showing up not just for the world, but for your partner. Jessica shared with me her experience living with a husband who, over time, had simply stopped caring. He stopped showering regularly. His smoking got worse. The house smelled. His breath was unbearable. His clothes were stained and wrinkled. He snored so loudly she could barely sleep. She tried to be patient. She tried to bring it up kindly. But eventually, she stopped trying. And she started pulling away, not out of anger, but out of survival. "I used to love him deeply," she said. "But now, I can't even stand to be near him." It's one thing to grow old together. It's another to let go of yourself entirely and expect your partner to endure it without a word. Marriage isn't about perfection, but it is about mutual effort. And when one partner stops trying altogether, stops caring about how they present themselves, how they show up in the relationship, it can feel like a betrayal of the love that once held you together. Many women in their later years feel stuck between guilt and resentment. They remember their vows. They want to stay loyal. But inside, they're dying a little each day from the emotional and physical distance that's crept in. They don't want to leave. But they also don't want to live the rest of their lives feeling like roommates, caretakers, or invisible ghosts in their own homes. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with truth and choice. It's okay to admit that things have changed, that you're no longer the couple you once were, that your heart aches in ways you never thought it would. But it's also okay to ask for more, to say out loud, "This isn't enough for me anymore." Not with anger, not with blame, but with honesty. Because if you can find the courage to speak your truth, you may just find your way back to each other. Or, at the very least, back to yourself. And if your partner isn't willing to meet you halfway, if he's chosen comfort over connection, silence over effort, withdrawal over partnership, then you have every right to think about what you need to be happy in the years ahead. You've spent decades giving, supporting, sacrificing. Don't let the final chapters of your life be written in resentment. You deserve joy. You deserve peace. You deserve to feel like your life, your love, still matters. So let's take this moment and breathe deeply. Let's remember that it's never too late to ask for change, to invite your partner back into the light. And if he won't come, then at least you'll know you tried. You stood up for yourself. And that matters. If anything in this conversation touched your heart today, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your story, your thoughts, your hopes. You never know who else might read it and feel a little less alone. And if this video helped you in any way, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this, created with care, for people just like you, who still believe that love at any age is worth talking about. Here's to living truthfully, to feeling seen, and to never settling for a life that doesn't bring you warmth. You are never too old to start loving better, including yourself.